Welcome to the world of scary stories. It's about to get really creepy. So, are you ready? Let's go. My grandma was always a little weird. She was always prepared for anything. A week before everything fell apart, she called me and said, "Grandson, come over. It's going to be like 63 here soon." And I laughed at the time, but I went anyway, just to be near her. My head was in complete chaos, and her voice sounded so calm, so confident, as if she'd been waiting for this her whole life. I arrived at her house on the outskirts of town, when the news was already showing how everything was going to hell. The streets were in complete chaos, screams, sirens, and here there was silence. It was an old wooden house with a leaning fence, but it looked like a fortress. The windows were boarded up. The door was heavy, metal, like a punka. When I knocked, she opened the door as if nothing had happened. She didn't even ask how I got there. She simply said, "Welcome home, grandson. Come in. Everything's ready." Inside, it was just as I expected, as if she'd been cooking since the end of the world her whole life. She was crammed from head to toe with canned goods, cereals, and bottles of water, and the corner rooms were lined with canisters of Bedin. The pantry was full of an arsenal, guns, knives, and some kind of homemade traps. Everything was perfect, and it scared me. "Grandma, how did you do all this?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "I was getting ready," she simply answered. For the next few days, we lived in this strange silence, with sirens and screams outside the windows and peace inside. I tried to talk to her, to understand how she knew, but she was silent. She just sat there, staring into space, stroking her old cat. One night, I couldn't sleep. The screams outside were too loud. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and saw that my grandmother was awake too. She was sitting by the window, looking into the darkness, and whispering something. I came closer, and she turned to me. "Grandson, don't be afraid," she said. "This isn't the worst thing." Her words made me cringe. I didn't understand what could be more terrible than all this chaos. The next morning, I decided that I needed to do something. Just sitting within four walls and waiting wasn't my thing. I started sorting through things in the pantry to keep myself busy. I rearranged cans, checked cartridges, and suddenly, behind one of the drawers, I came across an old wooden chest. It was locked, but the lock was old, and I easily broke it. Inside were old newspapers, some photographs, and a thick leather diary. I opened it. It was written in my grandmother's tiny scrawled handwriting. I started reading it. October 16th. Today it started. The same symptoms, the same smell, panic and screams in the city. I gathered in the house. My son, my little Vanechka, sits quietly. He doesn't understand what's happening. I hope he never will. We will stay here and wait, as always. I turned the page. The next entry was 24 years later, March 23, 1987. They came back. I thought it was the last time. Newspaper reports talk about an unknown virus, but I know it was them. I closed all the windows, boarded up the doors. Screams can be heard at night. They beat on the walls. I saw him. This is my Vanechka, my beloved son, but he doesn't recognize me. His eyes are empty. I have to be strong. I have to hold on. I need to feed them so they go away. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe my eyes. This is my father, who passed away when I was little. He's a zombie. This can't be. I read on. September 14th, 2002. The third time. I'm old, but I'm strong. I know what to do. They can't get inside. They remember me. I hear their voices. They call for me. They call for their mother. I feed them. Just like last time. This is the only way. Otherwise, they will tear the whole house apart. We need to keep them downstairs, in the dark. I dropped the diary. My hands were shaking. She had survived the zombie outbreak 3 times. She had watched her son, my father, become one of them, and she had kept him in this house. I couldn't understand. I had to talk to her. I went out to the kitchen. She was sitting in the same chair as always, but now I looked at her with different eyes. "Granny, what is this?" I put the diary on the table. She looked up at me. "Did you find it?" she said. "I knew you would. I left it there on purpose." I couldn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting for an answer. "I couldn't tell you," she continued. "I didn't want to scare you, but you have to know, it's not just a virus. They remember. They are looking for those they loved. They are looking for their home, and they will never leave until you feed them." "Will you feed them?" I repeated, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Who? What?" She remained silent. I woke up in the middle of the night from a strange sound, like someone scratching on wood. I tensed, quietly went out into the hallway. The sound was coming from the basement. I looked at Granny. She was sitting in a chair. I quietly approached the basement door. It was locked with a heavy steel bolt. I looked at Granny. She nodded to me. "Go ahead," she said, "but be careful." I slid the bolt aside. The door creaked open. Something smelled from inside. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and began to descend. With every step the smell grew stronger. I went down the last step and shone the light around. I saw them. Dozens of disfigured, rotting bodies. They stood, leaning against the walls, piled on top of each other. Their eyes were empty, but they were moving. Slowly, like in slow motion. They weren't aggressive. They just stood there and looked at me. Their bodies were covered in sores. Rot. I recognized them. I recognized the old neighbor who passed away 20 years ago. I recognized the mailman who brought letters as a child. And I saw my father. He was standing against the wall and looking at me. He looked just like in the old photographs. Just his flesh. And I screamed. I couldn't believe my eyes. I shone the light on the floor. It was strewn with food. There were scraps of meat in the corner. I understood. She was feeding them. Her own zombie army. Her own family. And they were all looking at me. The last member of this strange, terrible family. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Grandma was standing in the doorway. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at them. Time to feed the basement again. said Grandma, and I realized I'd never be able to get out of there. I'd become part of this house, part of its collection. Basically forget everything you knew about hospitals, where I ended up with something else entirely. It all started out so mundane. I needed a routine blood test for a medical examination at work. I googled a private clinic with good reviews so I wouldn't have to wait in line. I found one, seemingly decent, in an old but solid building, almost in the city center. The name was something like Health Plus or Medical Expert. I can't remember anymore. I drove up and parked. From the outside everything looked normal. A massive wooden door. I pushed it open and walked inside. And then something strange started happening. You know, that feeling when you walk into a room and it's like the sound has been turned off. Not just silence but a vacuum. My ears started ringing. In a regular hospital clinic there's always a fresh noise, coughing, someone shuffling their feet, grumbling at the reception desk, the phone ringing. And here, nothing. Absolute silence. I found myself in a spacious hall. The floor was old tile. The walls painted a government-issued pale green. It didn't smell of bleach or medicine, but rather damp, like an old basement. There was no reception at all, just an empty counter in the corner, littered with some kind of paperwork. No computers, no phones, not a soul. Maybe I'd come to the wrong place? That was my first thought. But there was a sign on the door with opening hours. I was on time. I walked further into the long corridor. The fluorescent lights under the ceiling hummed and flickered, but they gave off little light. And there they sat, the patients, 10, maybe 12. They sat on hard wooden benches. Men, women, all ages. Everyone was wearing regular street clothes. And everyone was silent. Not just silent but frozen. No one was scrolling through their phones, reading a book, or looking around. They were all staring straight ahead, at the wall opposite them. I walked past, trying not to make any noise, and sat down on an empty bench at the very end of the hallway, facing them. I felt incredibly uneasy. It was like I was on a film set, where extras are waiting for the director's command. I took out my phone to check. There was no network, no Wi-Fi either. Okay, that happens. I put the phone away and waited. Waiting for whom? I couldn't tell. The doors to the offices along the hallway were closed. There were no signs or numbers on them, just smooth wooden doors. 5 minutes passed. Nothing changed. No one came in. No one came out. None of those sitting even moved. And then I noticed. At first, I didn't understand what exactly about their appearance had made me so uneasy. Well, people are sitting. Well, they are silent. Maybe they were waiting for some complicated procedure. Nervous. But then my gaze caught on the hands of one woman. She was sitting closest to me. Her hands were resting on her lap. Her fingers, they were trembling very, very finely. It was an unusual tic, like old people's. The trembling was ragged, unnatural, as if the fingers had a life of their own. And I looked closely at the others, and a chill ran down my spine. Everyone who sat in that damned corridor, had the same trembling hands. The young guy in the sweatshirt, the older man in the coat. That woman had an absolutely identical fine convulsive tremor. It was impossible. They were sitting in different positions, but their hands were all as if they were carbon copies of each other. And at that moment I heard a sound. It came from the depths of the corridor, from somewhere around the corner. At first quiet, barely audible, muffled and damp. It was like someone throwing something heavy and soft onto a wet tile floor, something that didn't bounce. The rhythm was almost perfect, like a metronome, but sometimes it faltered, as if whoever was making the sound lost strength for a second, then resumed with fury. Thud, thud. I gripped the bench and looked at these people with shaking hands, listening to that disgusting wet thud, and knowing I was in the wrong place. It was too late to run. The patients didn't react to the sound at all. Their empty eyes continued to stare at the wall. This made it even more terrifying. The thud grew louder, getting closer. Now I could discern new details. After each thud there was a soft slap and something like a dragging sound, like someone taking a step and dragging a leg behind them. I stopped breathing. I looked at the turn at the end of the corridor, where the sound was coming from. A dark opening with nothing visible beyond. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I just sat and watched. And then it appeared. A figure appeared from around the turn. It was a man in a white coat. He was tall and thin. He moved slowly, dragging one leg. The same gait I had heard. He stopped at the end of the corridor, and looked at the sitting patients. Then his gaze found me, and he smiled. My God, that smile. It expressed nothing. Just thin eyes stretched to the side on a face as pale as a sheet. But the scariest thing was his eyes. His eyes were completely empty. They had no pupils, no irises, just two whitish balls that looked as if through me. It was at that moment that I realized what was making that knocking sound. In his hand, he was holding a stethoscope, but an unusual one. Attached to the end of the metal membrane was a heavy lead ball, wrapped in something like a dirty bandage, and with each step he methodically hit himself with this ball on his chest, right in the area of the heart. He walked slowly toward me. His empty eyes never left me. The smile never left his face. The patients around him remained motionless, but their trembling seemed to intensify. She became almost convulsive. He came up and stopped right in front of me. He smelled like spoiled meat. He didn't say a word. He simply raised his free hand, curled his index finger, inviting me to follow him. There, into the darkness of the corridor from which he came. His movements were smooth. I looked at his empty eyes, at that eerie smile, at the stethoscope with the weight with which he beat himself on his chest, and I realized that if I went with him, I would never return. No, I whispered. I abruptly jumped up onto the benches, pushing him away. He didn't expect it and staggered, making a quiet, thumping sound. I ran to the exit, to the same massive door through which I had entered. I didn't look back. I just ran, hearing that measured knock behind me. There it was. The door. Salvation. And before I could grab it, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I turned around anyway, and he was standing there looking at me. His smile widened. But that wasn't what was scary. Everyone sitting on the benches, they were standing. They were standing in the aisle. A dense, silent wall. They were no longer looking at the wall. They were all looking at me. And their hands were no longer shaking. They were calmly lowered along their bodies. He was walking towards me, slowly, and ahead stood a wall of empty people, blocking my exit. I looked at them. They looked at me. He was approaching behind me. The door was a couple of steps away, and I don't know what's scarier, what's behind me, or what awaits ahead. And I don't know what's scarier, what awaits ahead.